You're looking down at a dog. It's looking back at you. Its eyebrows pull up in the middle, its eyes go a little wider, and you feel something tighten in your chest. You call this the puppy dog eyes. You figure it's begging for food, or it's sad, or it's just naturally adorable. It's not natural. That eyebrow movement comes from one specific facial muscle, and that muscle barely exists in the dog's closest living relative. Wild wolves can't make this expression the way dogs can. Only domestic dogs pull it off with any real intensity. And once you know that, you have to question the whole story you've been told that humans chose to keep dogs around because dogs were easy to control. It might be the other way around. In 2019, researcher Julian Kaminsky at the University of Portsmouth published a strange anatomical finding. She and her team dissected the facial muscles of dogs and gray wolves and found one muscle in particular called the levator anguli oculi medialis. Its job is to pull the inner corner of the eyebrow upward. Researchers label the resulting movement AU101 in their coding system, and it's become shorthand for the whole expression. In wolves, the muscle behind it is barely developed, just a scrappy little bundle of fibers. In dogs, it's almost always present, fully formed, ready to fire the second a human looks their way. That's the muscle behind the puppy dog eyes you thought was pure instinct. It's not a trait dogs inherited from wolves in general. It's something that evolved after dogs split off from their wolf ancestors in a window of maybe 30,000 years, which is nothing in evolutionary terms. In other words, over that stretch, natural selection kept favoring the wolves-turned dogs that could make an expression humans found impossible to resist. Kaminsky's team even found that shelter dogs who raised their eyebrows more often got adopted faster, which is about as close to real-world proof as this kind of theory ever gets. Picture the entire domestication story as a negotiation stretched across tens of thousands of years, and that eyebrow raise is just one small clause buried in the contract. Here's the catch, though. That clause isn't only written on the face. It's written deeper, inside the brain chemistry of both species. So here's the question this video is built around. When you think you're the one who domesticated dogs, is it possible you've been getting domesticated right back, just through a mechanism you never noticed? The popular version of the dog origin story goes like this. Prehistoric humans grabbed wolf pups, raised them, and slowly bred the friendliest ones over generations. Humans in the driver's seat the whole way through. It's a tidy story, but most of the archaeological and behavioral evidence doesn't back it up. The theory that's gained wider acceptance among researchers, tied to the work of behavioral ecologist Raymond Coppinger, is called self-domestication. The core idea, once humans started settling down, the trash piles around camps became a new food source. The bolder wolves, the ones less afraid of people, started creeping in to scavenge scraps and carcasses. A wolf that kept too much distance lost out on food. A wolf that was bold enough to approach, but calm enough not to get killed, survived and reproduced better than the rest. Nobody captured these wolves. They walked into the deal on their own. Humans weren't the ones making the first move, they were just the selection pressure, the same way weather or water supply shapes a species. And once these bolder, more human-tolerant wolves kept living near people across generations, something unexpected started happening inside their bodies, something biologists call domestication syndrome. It's a cluster of traits that keeps showing up together in nearly every self-domesticated or human-domesticated species. Not just dogs, floppy ears, curled tails, patchy coat colors, and, most strikingly, a noticeably smaller brain. Skull and endocast measurements comparing domestic dogs to gray wolves consistently show dog brains running roughly 20 to 30% smaller than a wolf's, adjusted for body size. 30% isn't a small number. That's close to a third of the gray matter trimmed away over the course of domestication. The regions shrinking the most tend to be tied to fear response and vigilance, exactly the parts of the brain that keep a wild wolf alive. Put plainly, to earn a safe spot next to humans, dogs paid for it with the very brain circuitry their ancestors relied on to survive. This is probably the hardest part of the story to pin down with certainty, so it's worth being upfront about it. Scientists still debate whether a smaller brain actually means less intelligent or whether it just reflects energy getting reallocated, less spent on constant vigilance, more spent on reading emotions and communicating with humans. Some recent work even questions whether the shrinkage is a uniquely dramatic case at all once you compare dogs to other closely related wild canid species rather than to wolves alone. There's no full consensus yet, but most of the behavioral data still leans toward the reallocation explanation. Because while the survival-focused part of the brain was shrinking, a completely new social skill set was expanding, and this is where the story shifts from the face to the brain's own chemistry. In 2015, researcher Miho Nagasawa at Azabu University in Japan published an experiment in the journal Science. She had dogs and their owners spend about 30 minutes together, gazing into each other's eyes, then measured oxytocin, a hormone tied to bonding and trust, often nicknamed the love hormone, in urine samples from both. The result, oxytocin spiked in both the humans and the dogs after eye contact, and the spike in the human owners correlated directly with how long their dog gazed back at them. This is a two-way biochemical loop. The dog looks at you, your oxytocin rises, you naturally look back longer and pet it more. Its oxytocin rises in turn, which makes it seek out your gaze even more. Nagasawa called this the oxytocin gaze loop, and here's the detail that matters most. When she tried the same setup with wolves raised by humans from birth, the loop barely showed up. The wolves just wouldn't hold eye contact long enough to trigger it. It's worth flagging that a few other research teams later raised methodological questions about that original comparison, but follow-up studies with dogs alone have kept finding the same gaze oxytocin link. So the core loop has held up even as the wolf comparison gets debated. Put these two pieces together. The AU101 movement creates an expression that makes you want to look longer, and the oxytocin gaze loop turns that longer look into a mild biochemical hook running in both brains at once. A dog doesn't need to understand your language, doesn't need to outsmart you in any raw sense. It just needs to trigger one ancient neural pathway that evolved to bond parents to their children, and you'll automatically start treating it like something worth protecting. So, the question of who domesticated who might never have had one clean answer because it was never really a one-way street. The Boulder Wolves chose to move closer to humans. Humans chose to keep the least threatening ones around. But somewhere inside that same process, natural selection also handed the descendants of those wolves a toolkit for hijacking human emotion, one that runs whether you notice it or not. Dogs lost roughly a third of the survival brainpower their ancestors had, and in exchange, they got the ability to bend the brain chemistry of a species far smarter than themselves on paper. That's not a losing trade. That might be one of the shrewdest deals in evolutionary history, paid for in a currency the dog no longer needed anyway. Next time you look down at a dog and catch that eyebrow raise, those eyes going a little wider, remember, that's not a random, cute little accident. That's the finished product of an evolutionary arms race that's been running for tens of thousands of years, and right now, you're still part of the experiment. So if you're honest with yourself, think about the last time you looked into an animal's eyes long enough to feel something shift inside you. Was that you falling in love with it, or was that your brain doing exactly what evolution built it to do?